Good morning, everyone. My name is John Livingstone. I'm a paediatric neurologist from Leeds, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present at the Alex TLC Community Weekend. And I'm going to tell you about the new National Registry for Inherited White Matter Disorders, or leukodystrophies, that we've been working on for the past couple of years and which is about to go live. Before starting, I'd really like to acknowledge the rest of the team, without whom we wouldn't have been able to do this. And particularly, I'd like to mention Bernie Stocks, who has been leading the development of the service specification and has been working particularly on the registry in the last 18 months. But also Sally Kavanagh, who's the Clinical Information Manager at NHS England, and a special appreciation for the work of Sarah Hunt from Alex TLC and Helen Morris from Metabolic Support UK, who really have put in a huge effort in developing the registry to its current form. The other clinicians on the team are Rahul Singh from Evelina Hospital and David Lynch from Queen's Square. And I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the team at Arden and Jen, who have been building the registry and will be maintaining it and managing it in the future. Now, I spoke to you last year about the service specification for the new Inherited White Matter Diseases service. And Rahul Singh is going to talk to you about this in more detail later. But I just want to remind you a bit of the timeline. It's the process that's been going on for quite some time. But the key point was in January of 2020, when the Clinical Priorities Advisory Group of NHS England approved the service specification and gave it the green light to go ahead. Now, clearly the pandemic then happened and things slowed down. We were anxious that maybe the approval would be withdrawn given all the other priorities. However, we were very pleased that that was not the case. And in particular, we were given permission to continue with the work to develop the registry, which is what we've been doing really for the last 18 months. The good news is that in July of this year, the formal procurement process for the clinical service was given the green light, and the aim will be that that service is up and running, all being well, by Easter of next year. And as I said, Rahul will be talking to you in more detail about that. This is the front page of the service specification from the NHS England website. And as you'll see, one of the core features of the new White Matter service is to develop a patient registry and to enter patients with inherited white matter diseases onto the disease register. So it's right there at the center of the aims of the service. And Rahul will be discussing this in more detail, but this is the flow diagram for how the clinical service will work. But I really wanted just to emphasize that at all levels of the service, whether or not a patient is seen by the service or just discussed at a virtual MDT, or indeed whether they're being seen by a different highly specialized service, such as the existing lysosomal disease service or mitochondrial service, we would hope that we would be able to enter the patient onto the disease registry and really to record information on all patients with these diseases. So before going on to describe the current registry, I just thought it might be useful to consider what we mean by a disease registry. I put here a simple, and you might say simplistic, definition that I made up myself. I think overall a registry can be seen as a collection of information about individuals affected by a clinical disease in order to achieve an outcome, but ultimately in order to improve outcome. There are, of course, much more formal definitions, and one of the ones that is often cited is this one from Glicklich from 2005, which describes a registry as an organized system that uses observational study methods to collect uniform data, clinical and other, to evaluate specified outcomes for a population defined by a particular disease, condition, or exposure, and it serves one or more predetermined scientific, clinical, or policy purposes. Now, that's a rather dry definition. I recently came across these statements in a very nice paper from the Italian Neuromuscular Disease Registry group, where they were presenting the overview of their experience of setting up this registry over the past decade. And it's I think has many similarities to what we are hoping to achieve with the White Matter Registry. I'll just read out these quotes. All stakeholders acknowledge that well-structured databases are tools of great scientific and practical value to improve patient care. High-quality data may enable studies on disease epidemiology, natural history, functional outcomes, or real-world evaluation of drug efficacy and post-marketing drug surveillance. Moreover, registries can facilitate feasibility studies, trial design, and rapid identification of the most suitable patients to be included in clinical trials. Depending on the purpose, a registry may collect data directly from patients and their caregivers, or require the involvement of experts in the disease. And our registry is going to be collecting data from both these stakeholders, as I will discuss. Some years ago, the European and North American rare disease groups published these key principles for rare disease patient registries, 10 principles. And this provides a useful model for us to be aspiring to. And many of these points we would already be achieving by what we're planning with the registry. And this will be a useful guideline and principle to come back to. So the formal definition as stated on the registry specification document, the primary purpose is to support diagnosis, direct care, management, treatment and outcomes as part of the patient's pathway of care by ensuring accurate record keeping using good quality data on personal demographics and risk factors, any drug and treatment regimens and outcomes. So a somewhat cumbersome sentence, but which I think encompasses the aim. There are quite a few secondary purposes, and I will put these up here, and I won't read them all, but we'll read out some of them. The aim is to identify all patients with leukodystrophy or inherited white matter diseases and their molecular diagnosis, incidence, and prevalence, to enable data quality improvement, completeness, compliance, and accuracy, to prevent patients from being lost to follow-up, to provide data and analysis to inform strategic planning, financing, and commissioning of white matter disease services. Importantly, to identify and monitor variation in clinical treatment and outcomes and equity of access to treatment across England. And at this point, in case I forget to mention it later, the registry will be open to anybody in the UK, and we will be making special arrangements with the devolved nations, including their data on the registry. So this would hopefully be of relevance to the devolved nations too. The registry will enable trends to be tracked in inherited white matter diseases. The fundamental aim is to improve the quality of life of patients and families by tracking treatments delivered, patient outcomes during and following treatment, to monitor safety of treatments, to collect data to monitor clinical effectiveness of treatments, and then various aims to support research and enable access to research and treatment studies, and ultimately to add to our current knowledge base of these rare diseases. So the registry will be owned and supported by NHS England. I've already described the process that we have followed in developing the registry. We initially were meeting approximately once a month, but that has increased. So currently we're meeting weekly, and I'll discuss the implementation plan shortly. We've consulted with various different people at different times, including taking formal legal advice from the NHS England. And we've had consultations with the procurement team, obviously Ard and Jen, who are setting up the registry, and discussion with people who have run other registries for their advice and recommendations. I can discuss this later. So one of the important aspects of this will be, how do we monitor that we're actually achieving our aims and that we're actually delivering what we set out to deliver. And this is where the registry governance comes in. Governance is a term that's used an awful lot nowadays. And this is a formal definition. It's a system by which entities are directed and controlled. It is concerned with structure and processes for decision-making, accountability, control, and behavior at the top of an entity. Governance influences how an organization's objectives are set and achieved, how risk is monitored and addressed, and how performance is optimized. So to this end, we are planning two groups that will oversee the governance of the registry. These include the registry steering group and a registry development committee. We've developed terms of references for both of these. And this is just showing the terms of reference for the steering group, which is to put in place the necessary attributes to ensure a well-functioning registry, including data security, governance, legal and ethical and financial controls, to steer the content of the registry, to undertake 6-monthly review of governance and performance, to ensure peer review of outcomes and processes, to agree the mechanism to evaluate registry program performance, and other tasks around the makeup of the committee, the chair, and how meetings are run, etc. The Registry Development Committee has similar but not identical aims, which are more about the day-to-day running of the registry, to guide the direction of travel of the registry, to monitor the functioning of the registry with regard to its stated purpose, to review which data needs to be collected, to maintain data input and quality, and so on. And importantly, to review and consider and respond to requests for access to the data that's held by the registry. These lists show the makeup of the two committees. You'll see they're rather similar but not identical. The steering group will have members who are not necessarily white matter disease specialists, but would be representing specialties of neurology or metabolic medicine. And these are the clinical reference group members. Both committees will have robust representation from patient representatives, from Alex TLC Metabolic Support, and a third member who's yet to be decided. And there will be the NHS England and members as well. So the core features of the registry are that, firstly, that it will be open to all individuals with an inherited white matter disease in the UK. And we would aspire to try and get data on anybody with a white matter disease in the UK, but obviously this may be hard to achieve. Importantly, referrals will be accepted both from patients and carers and from clinicians. The data collection will be entirely electronic, and we recognize that that may pose difficulties for some individuals, and we're developing a mechanism to enable them to be assisted into inputting their data. The registry will be hosted by one of the inherited white matter diseases centres. Now, the process for selecting the centres is currently underway, but the decisions are pending. Hopefully, we'll know by the end of the year. And one of the 5 centres will be the one that will host the registry. And the registry will allow entry of ongoing follow-up data, both from clinicians and patients. And importantly, the patient and public voice will be central to the governance of the registry. Now, this diagram really is a flow diagram to illustrate how the registry may work. And I think the two main things I want to say here, I think this stage is important. So when either a patient or a clinician makes a request to register a patient with the or themselves with the registry, we will need to do some data gathering to get the clinical information to ensure that they actually do have an inherited white matter disease. And that may sound silly, but there are plenty of examples of where a clinician may have made a diagnosis of an inherited white matter disease when in fact it's a different disorder, or a patient may have in fact been told that they have a leukodystrophy or an inherited white matter disease when in fact the diagnosis is something else. And there are a number of non-genetic disorders which cause significant white matter involvement, and which may cause diagnostic difficulty and may ultimately result in somebody being given the wrong diagnosis. Now, obviously, if that were the case, then we would feed back both to the clinician and to the relevant individual about why a decision had been made not to accept them on the registry. Similarly, the white matters clinical centres will be able to enter patients directly onto the registry. Now, the issue of consent is important. We've had discussion with the legal team of NHS England, and they have pointed out that as the main aim of the registry is to do with clinical care of the patient, that we don't formally need to get consent to collect that data. However, obviously, if data is going to be shared with another body, another individual, or a researcher, or a team carrying out a therapeutic trial, then we will take consent for the data to be shared. Now, and how the process for doing that is currently being discussed, where there are different approaches to that, and we will make a decision about that in the near future. I'll skip past this slide. Now I'm going to try and share a different screen, and hopefully this will work. What I want to do now is show you the sort of data that we will be collecting. This is at the moment on an Excel spreadsheet. Now, hang on, this is okay. No, I'm sorry, this is not working. So I'll just go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so these are just examples of the sort of data we'll collect in the registry. And the actual final version will be in a different form, and this is currently on an Excel thing. So there's several domains. There's the basic patient information, key medical information, current treatment information, follow-up medical information, and the patient entered data about themselves and follow-up and data entered by a patient representative, and then a section on governance. So if I just show you an example of this, this is the sort of data we would collect when we're registering the individual. We're aiming to try and have as many drop-down boxes as possible, but there will obviously be situations where we need to have free text, and so there'll be a mixture of drop-down boxes and free text. This is an example of the key medical information. You'll see we have suspected white matter disease, confirmed white matter disease, diagnosis, date of confirmed diagnosis, and so on. This slide is now showing one of the sections that would be completed by a patient, and we'll be collecting both condition-related information and societal information on how it is affecting them in their everyday life. And these are just some examples. Please tell us here about you as a patient. Are you experiencing any new symptoms or significant events? For example, unexplained admission or stay in hospital, unexplained complication, and so on. That's free text. And then there's a whole series where there would be drop-down menus. How do you rate the quality of your medical care? The drop-down would say very good, good, moderate, poor, very poor, and so on. We are going to be, this is another example of the sort of drop-down boxes and the questions that they refer to. In the medical section, we're going to be using what is called the HUDAS score, which is the WHO disability score, which uses 5 different domains, and there's a relatively straightforward way of recording information about how conditions are impacting on people. And the registry will link directly into that and enable us to fill in the domains directly onto the registry. We're currently discussing whether we use that as well in the section that patients and patient representatives fill in. And it may be that we use a combination of that and more generic questions. And we would certainly welcome views and thoughts on that. And I should point out that the questions in the patient and patient representative section were developed by Sarah and Helen following a consultation with yourselves, and as you know, many of you may have been involved in responding to a questionnaire to ask what sort of things that you feel would be useful to ask about. And so this is the result of a lot of work by Sarah and Helen reflecting that. We won't have a separate website for the registry, but we will have a web page, and this is an example of what the web page will look like. It may be modified slightly, but the headings will remain the same. So the front page will tell us about the registry, and there will be these other pages which will give details about the white matter disease centres, which, as yet we don't know where those are going to be. There'll be a page for patient support and important links, and there'll be a page for frequently asked questions. This shows the patient support and links page. I think we're probably going to modify this bottom section because it's likely that we'll have many more groups to include here, and so we may have a link that is off this page, but there will be links into all the other groups, as well as the sort of parent organization of Alex TLC and metabolic support. So currently the implementation plan is that the pilot study will roll out mid-December, and I think some of you will certainly be involved in the pilot. And the idea of that is that we enter dummy data. In other words, we just make up an imaginary person. It doesn't have to be about yourself, but it's really to see how easy or difficult it is to enter data into the registry, to use the registry, to make any important changes before it goes live. We're hoping that we'll have that information by the end of the year, and then we're hoping that the full rollout will begin early in the year. So in other words, we're hoping that the registry will already be up and running and working before the white matter disease centres start functioning at around Easter time. I've mentioned that there'll be a web page. There'll be a support service from Arden and Jem who will operate 5 days a week. There are frequently asked questions on the web page, and we would hope to publish newsletters and reports and relevant information and make that available when it comes along. So in summary, I think the registry is a very exciting opportunity to collect relevant data on inherited white matter diseases that will be of benefit to all of us involved in working in the field of inherited white matter disorders, but also for people with inherited white matter disorders. And I think this is really a crucial element of the way we hope the registry will be able to benefit people. It has been a collaborative process developed by patient and care organisations, clinicians and NHS management. And we hope that it will allow a collection of data about the lived experience of having an inherited white matter disease. So that's all I want to say at the moment. I will be happy to answer questions about it. And I'd like to just again acknowledge the team that have done this work. Thank you very much.